2 Corinthians chapter 11, I'll read beginning at verse 7. Have I committed an offense in abasing myself that ye might be exalted, because I have preached to you the gospel of God freely? I robbed other churches, taking wages of them to do you service. And when I was present with you and wanted, I was chargeable to no man. For that which was lacking to me, the brethren which came from Macedonia supplied. And in all things I have kept myself from being burdensome unto you, so I will keep myself. As the truth of Christ is in me, no man shall stop me of this boasting in the regions of Achaia. Wherefore, because I love you not, God knoweth. But what I do, that will I do, that I may cut off occasion from them which desire occasion, that wherein they glory, they may be found even as we. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed to an angel of light. Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. I have developed, since we moved out here, a love for fruit, fresh fruit. Notice I didn't say vegetables, just fruit. My wife goes to the store, goes to the market, and she gets one of my favorites, watermelon. I love watermelon. I could eat a whole 10-pound watermelon in 15 minutes. No. Do you ever get a watermelon, you thump the outside of it, and it sounds good? You're told the sound of it will tell you what's on the inside. So we thump it. Sounds good, promising. I get my hopes up. She gets her hopes up. It's dry. No juice. It's not sweet. What a disappointment. It doesn't stop me from eating it, don't worry. I still eat it. Don't you wish life would be obvious and things would be obvious to us, that what we see on the outside is what something really is on the inside? Life demands discernment. Life demands that we carefully analyze and carefully pay attention to what's going on around us. People make all kinds of claims about themselves, especially when it comes to religious matters and when it comes to Christianity. Paul, as a true minister of Christ and for Christ, was not one thing for one church or one thing in one letter and something else completely different. Paul was always consistently authentic. He was not forceful, as we might think of it. He says, I'm not bold in speech. And can you believe it, that some people took that as a sign of weakness? And some people took it as a sign of insincerity? The demand for integrity and consistency in life, I believe, in ministry is essential. I can't tell you how many times Matt and I share things about what is going on in ministry today. And it's so distressing. You turn on the TV and you see all kinds of charlatans out there, hucksters, con men. Years ago, someone gave me a book by Benny Hinn. I can't remember the title of it, but I took a magic marker and wrote across the title of it, Con Man. That's what he is. People need to witness one thing and one thing only in ministry when it comes to sincerity, and that is honesty and integrity. You know, there are so many people who perform functions that tend to be one thing one minute and something else completely different the next. I want you to notice this. We'll walk through this morning very quickly in the time we have. The Apostle Paul had been accused of his insincerity and accused of his lack of eloquence and all of these things. And one of the charges made against him is this: well, he doesn't accept money from you, so he's not really sincere. So in other words, they're telling the church, these false teachers are telling the church at Corinth, you're getting what you pay for with this guy. He's free, so he's cheap. And he's not really a minister of the gospel. And he's not really an apostle with authority. And he's going to put that to rest in these verses. And I think the way he ends this part so strongly about these false teachers, warning about them, that I want to spend some time talking about what he says. Because it's so important to understand the emphasis on discernment, especially in our day. In verse 7, he starts off by asking this question: have I committed an offense in abasing myself, that ye may be exalted, because I have preached to you the gospel of God freely? He's asking them, am I sinning against you? That word offense is literally the word sin. And he's asking them, am I sinning against you in abasing myself, in lowering myself, that ye might be exalted? It's fascinating, this whole section here. Think about this. What has he said that Christ has done? Back in chapters 8 and 9. You know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, and we talked about that. How rich is Christ? It's all his. He created everything. All the gold, all the silver, all the precious stones. He created the sun. He created the moon. It's all his. Though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that ye through his poverty might be rich. And Paul, as a follower of Christ, says essentially the same thing about himself when he says, when I abased myself. Did Christ abase himself by becoming man? Yes. And Paul is essentially saying the same thing. I abase myself. For what reason? Verse 7 says, that ye might be exalted. I'm doing it for you. I'm not doing it for me. This is not something that I have to do for my benefit. This is something I'm doing for you, for your benefit. And the reason I'm doing it, he says in verse 7, because I have preached the gospel to you, or he describes what he's done. I preach the gospel of God freely to you. That word freely is an interesting word. It's used a number of times. We read it this morning in John 15. They hated me without a cause. They hated me freely. In Romans chapter 3, verse 24, Paul says that we are justified freely without cause. Same word. Now he's saying, I'm coming to you and I preach the gospel to you without charge. I preach to you freely. In verse 8, he goes on and says, I robbed other churches. Now, understand, he didn't walk into other churches with some kind of weapon and demand all their money. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is the money, the resources that these other churches gave, he says, they met my needs. They enabled me to do you service, to perform the ministry for you, so that you weren't burdened with helping me or helping sustain my life or meeting my needs. In verse 9, he says, when I was present with you and wanted, when I was in need and I was present with you, I was chargeable to no man. In other words, they weren't responsible or they weren't required to meet the needs that Paul had to even live life. For that which was lacking to me, the brethren which came from Macedonia supplied. I mean, you see this all the time in his words here. He's saying, God supplied all the needs. God supplied them, and God used these people to meet the needs that I had. And they came from Macedonia and did it. In all things, I have kept myself from being burdensome to you. I didn't require you. I'm not compelling you to be a burden to you. And he says, so will I keep myself. I will do this. He's determined to do this. He's determined to be this way. I have always believed this about the gospel ministry. It is not about money. It is not about what a person, a pastor or a missionary can get from the congregation. It's never been about that. I'm very thankful for the generosity that enables us to continue on in ministry. And I'm determined to be that way, just like Paul. He says in verse 11 or verse 10, as the truth of Christ is in me, so no man shall stop me of this boasting in the regions of Achaia. I mean, I'm going to keep saying this over and over and over again. It's like we have this phrase, I'm going to keep harping on this until I'm blue in the face. I'm going to keep harping on this until I'm blue in the face. I'm going to keep telling people this because the charge that he was insincere, the charge that he lacked eloquence, the charge that he didn't take the money that he should have, he didn't demand the money that he should have. He says, I'm going to keep saying this over and over and over again. That's not what ministry is. I'm going to keep saying that. And then he's going to say, why? In verse 11, wherefore? Or why? Or for what reason? Because I love you not? I mean, it's fascinating to me that he answers this question, or he says this, that in a negative way. Did Paul love them? Did Paul love them? You can shake your head, yes. Paul loved them sincerely. He loved them deep. Here's a group of believers in this city of Corinth that he had spent 18 months ministering. He knew many of them by name. He had spent time pouring his life into their lives. And to put it this way, I think is an indication of how deeply Paul cared for this church. Paul cared for these individual believers. Wherefore, because I love you not? God knoweth. I mean, he doesn't appeal to any human or any horizontal relationship. He appeals to God. He says, God knows. God knows the answer to this question. Does Paul love the church at Corinth or does Paul hate the church at Corinth? God knows. And Paul loved the church at Corinth. In verse 12, he goes on and says, but what I do, I will do, that I may cut off occasion from them which desire occasion, that wherein they glory, they may be found even as we are. In other words, what he's saying is, I'm going to not give them a reason. I'm not going to give them even the ability to criticize me on this. It's absurd anyway, but I'm just going to cut off the opportunity that they have. And now here's where I want to spend the time. That was very quickly, because now he's going to really get into the details about who these people really are. He's going to thump the melon. Why is he so concerned about this? Why is he so concerned about these people? Look what he says. Look what he calls them. For such are false apostles. Remember what he said back in verse 5? Where is it? Verse 5. For I suppose I was not a whit behind the very chiefest apostles. He referred to them back there as literally super apostles. The word is mega, super apostles. And now down here he says, for such are false apostles. That word false is the word pseudo. He's a pretender apostle. He's not really an apostle. He's not really a sent one. These are not really authentic apostles, real apostles, genuine apostles. They appear to be apostles, but they're not. And when you look at them, they look impressive. But if you look superficially, they look impressive. I remember years and years and years ago, I was reading Ryrie's study Bible, and he has a note on Matthew chapter 10 about apostles. And he gave 3 qualifications for an apostle. And I have read that so many times, I've almost memorized it, not quite, and at my age now, it's almost impossible to memorize anything, so I just have to go back and read it. And what I'm going to do now. There were 3 qualifications for an apostle. An apostle had to, first of all, had seen Christ and have been an eyewitness to his resurrection. You had to have seen Christ or been an eyewitness to his resurrection. That's what Peter says in chapter 1 of Acts, verse 22, that the apostle who was to replace Judas, the person who was to replace Judas in the apostolic office, had to have been with us from the beginning. In other words, he had to have been there throughout the life of Christ, and he had to have seen the resurrection. Okay, let me say this very clearly now. There is not a person alive today who meets that qualification. There are no apostles today. None. Just based on that one. The second requirement, according to Ryrie, was this. He had to have been bestowed with power and authority to do sign gifts. Why? Because those sign gifts were given to authenticate the message that the apostle was preaching. It wasn't just these miracles that the apostles and even Christ, the miracles that they did, were not just to make people's lives better. You know what? That was a secondary, or even, can I use this word, third-dary benefit? That was a benefit far removed from the purpose of those sign gifts. Those sign gifts were to authenticate the message of God's servant. Interesting, one of the most prominent prophets in all of Scripture was a man by the name of John the Baptist. He was one of the most powerful spokesman that God had. And you know how many miracles he did? None. You know why? Because he ministered at the same time his cousin did. And God doesn't want the message confused. So did that invalidate John? Well, John wasn't an apostle. John was a prophet, an Old Testament prophet. The point is, sign gifts were second. They were important, but they bestowed the power and authority on those men. And third, he had to have been chosen either by the Lord or by the Holy Spirit. What about Paul? Paul was kind of an exception, but Paul met these qualifications. I believe Paul had seen Christ throughout his life, or at least throughout his ministry. He was familiar with Jesus. I think that's part of the reason that Paul found it so hard, and Paul persecuted the church so vehemently initially. But you know, when Paul saw the risen Christ, and he asked the question, "Who art thou?" And he says, "I'm Jesus whom thou persecutest. I'm Jesus of Nazareth whom thou persecutest." I think that was a knife in Paul's heart, spiritually speaking. And what a dramatic change took place in his life. And Paul met those qualifications. But these pseudo-apostles, they don't meet those qualifications. Because notice this next description: deceitful workers. Deceitful workers. They have the ability to deceive people. They can do good works, but such are used to deceive people into thinking that they're ministering for the Lord, and they're ministering to benefit those that they're serving. And you know, there's an interesting thing about these three verses. I'll read this, and I want you to notice a word that's used repeatedly, okay? Notice this word. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. I'll help you with this so you get this, okay? And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. You see, did you notice a word in there? That is an interesting word. That word means to masquerade, to pretend. To deceive. And notice what he says. They are transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. Satan transforms himself into the angel of light. Satan's ministers also be transformed. That word transformed means what's on the inside is not true on the outside. And what's true on the outside is not true on the inside. Keep your finger there and go back to Romans chapter 12. You know where I'm going with this, or what I'm going to say. Romans 12, look at this. I think this is important. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. What is that talking about? That is talking about external things, right? Present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Now watch what he says. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed. Be transformed. Guess what? That is a different Greek word. That is a word, metamorphosis. That is talking about being transformed. Watch what he says. Be transformed how? By the renewing of your mind. Be transformed internally so that externally you are different. Over here in chapter 11 of 1st or 2nd Corinthians, that's not the same word. It's a completely different word. Not a completely different word. It's the prefix is the same, but the main word is different. It's the word, I think it's the word where we get the word schematic. Ron was showing me some pictures earlier this morning and of wiring he had been doing. And one of the pictures he had taken was the schematic of that. And I looked at that and I thought, man, I'm glad he's doing that and not me, because that building would have burned down if I had been there. Because I can't read a schematic. The idea that these people are not what they really claim to be. That's the point. But notice what he says, and I got to quit, I'm out of time. No marvel. Don't be surprised. Don't be shocked by this. Why? Because even Satan transforms himself. That word literally is Satan transforms himself into an angel of light. Light is something beautiful, something positive. Satan is deceiving people. You know, I thought it was interesting. Paul says, no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. When Luther wrote A Mighty Fortress, he called Satan the prince of darkness grim. Not an angel of light, he's the prince of darkness. What a contrast. Therefore, if that's true, and it is, since that is true, it is no great thing if his ministers be also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness. He doesn't say that they are ministers of righteousness. He says as ministers of righteousness. They're pretenders. Whose end shall be according to their works. That is not a good thing. We don't have time to get into that now. I need to end this, but one of the things when I was in seminary, one of the things that I really enjoyed was were classes on church history. I loved that. I loved it. And one of the specific areas of church history I really got into was about the 20th century, the early 20th century. And specifically, the fundamentalist modernist controversy. I'm so thankful Matt went through American Christianity a while back. I'll just say that, a while back. A few months ago. And we talked about some of these things. And one of the things that I really, really appreciated about the fundamentalist modernist controversy was the fundamentalists were focused on good doctrine. Proverbs 4:2 talks about good doctrine. And I learned about things like the inspiration and inerrancy of Scripture and the deity of Christ and his atonement, his sacrificial substitutionary atonement, his resurrection, his ascension. And I learned that we're going to be resurrected one day. We're going to have resurrection bodies one day. And I learned things about the kingdom and the church. I learned about those things, and it was wonderful. And I learned about a lot of other people that didn't believe that believed in a totally different gospel. And I learned names of men that you probably haven't heard of. Some may have. I learned names like Washington Gladden and Lyman Abbott and Crawford Toy and Harry Fosdick and Shaler Matthews and Walter Rauschenbusch and Henry Van Dusen. You've never heard of those people. But you hear their disciples today all the time. All the time. I heard of men like Norman Vincent Peale and Karl Barth and Emil Brunner and Reinhold Niebuhr and Richard Niebuhr. The things that churches are doing today and the things that people are teaching today are the same things that those men taught 150, 140, 130, 100 years ago. It's no different. It's all the same. It's just got new packaging and new labeling on it. New names come up. But listen. They're false apostles, they're deceitful workers, and they transform themselves into the apostles of Christ. They're not really. And they follow the one who is a master at this, Satan. It is no great thing. They deny so many essential doctrines that we find so precious. I mean, I relish in the substitutionary atonement of Christ. He died in my place. Like that video said, for God so loved Gary that he gave his only begotten son for Gary. That if Gary will believe on his son, Gary will have eternal life. I know the video didn't say that, it said George, but I'm putting my name in there. You can put your name in there. And I trust you have. If you haven't, I implore you, before it's too late, do it today. Receive Christ as your Savior. Trust in Him and Him alone to be forgiven of your sins. I mean, Paul is all about this. Remember back in verse 7 of chapter 11, he said he came to them to preach the gospel of God freely. So we're about at Grace Bible Church, the gospel, that Jesus Christ came into this world to die for sinners, you and me, and rise from the dead, showing that the Father accepted His payment for our sins. That one payment alone. If you've not done that, do it now. Do it today. Don't wait. Don't put it off. Don't wait until it's too late. We've been warned. We have all this warning throughout the pages of this book. Warning about sin and warning about the consequences of it and the eternal consequence. An eternity in a place the Bible calls the lake of fire. Receive Christ before it's too late. Receive Him today. Don't put it off. Father, thank you for our time together this morning, and thank you for the day that you've given us, for the opportunity we have to consider some of this morning. Lord, help us to be discerning. Help us to not follow after the whims and fancies of the world. Help us to follow after you and your word, and to stick close to you and your word. We commit to you this time now in Jesus' name. Amen. If you would take your hymnals, please, and we'll sing our closing hymn.